Hey everybody, today we're going to be talking about Total War Pharaoh Dynasties. Why is it doing so good after its relaunch? Total War Pharaoh has relaunched a Total War Pharaoh Dynasties. Now, for those of you who aren't interested in Total War games or turn-based games or strategy games or anything like that, I'm going to try to keep this just talking about the differences between the launch version of the game and the new version of the game, what's new in the game, what's interesting to do in the game. And I'm going to try to do it in a way that people who don't even play these sorts of games might still be able to follow along and, find this interesting as to how this game released in such a disaster and how their development team has spent the last 9 months trying to relaunch the game into a state that people might actually want to play. So even if you don't play these sorts of games, let's try to help you understand that. The game currently on Steam has a 91% approval rating on its relaunch, Dynasties, and it has a higher concurrent player count than it has ever had throughout its entire history. On its relaunch, it has actually managed to get more players than it did even on its regular launch. Now, how has it managed to do that? The best way to describe that and the best way to go over that is, of course, to just go into new campaign. And we're not going to be playing a new campaign, but I'll just show you something that will obviously make a lot of sense for you. We can currently see here, and we start a new campaign, we can see Egypt, Hatti, Canaan. Now, these were the three only things in the game at launch. There were 4 Egyptian factions, 2 Hatti factions, and 2 Canaanite factions. Now, who are those? Obviously, you guys probably know who the Egyptians are, right? So there's the lower Egyptians, who are the Egyptians in the north, and the upper Egyptians, who are the Egyptians in the south. The Sudan would be the Egyptians in the south. For those of you who don't know, those would have been the Black Pharaohs. In the south, in the current modern day Sudan, in the upper Nile, said so because of its elevation. Back then people didn't have compasses, so upper just meant it was higher. Literally, it was just higher. So that's in the south is the upper Nile. That's where you had more of the black people. That's where you have Sudan. Past the point at which this game takes place, the people down there, the Kushites, the Nubians, actually managed to take over, and they became Pharaoh for a little bit of time. If you ever wondered the history of that, at any rate, in the game, the Nubians aren't in control of anything and are actually controlled by the north. So we can see we've got 4 different characters to play in Egypt. That's it. Only 4 different characters to play. Hatti, because they needed an enemy for Egypt. The game is called Total War Pharaoh, but it couldn't only be Egypt. They needed other characters for you to play as well. Hatti are the people of Eastern Anatolia. These are the Hittites. These are people that to the modern day don't really exist at all. But back then they did exist, and they were one of the biggest enemies of Egypt. They have a mere 2 characters that you can play. As you might imagine where we're going with this one, the game did not launch with a lot of content. So we have 4 people to play in Egypt who, great. We have 2 people to play in Hatti. Now these are the Canaanites. These are 2 people. The Canaanites don't really exist today either. The Phoenicians, the Canaanites, these people don't really exist to these days. But back then, in 1100 BC, there were 2 of them, apparently. They apparently only had 2 characters. In total, you had 8 playable characters. In a strategy game, that's not a whole lot, especially when most Egyptians will play similar to each other. Not perfectly similar, but similar enough. The Hatchins, the Hittites, will play pretty similar to each other, and the Canaanites will play pretty similar to each other. So there's 3 different factions with 8 different leaders on them. Not really a whole lot of content, as you can imagine, for people who want to replay the game, have new experiences, etc. On a strategy map like this game, it's kind of important that you have different positions you can start in. It's kind of important you have different factional units and things like that for players to be able to enjoy. Well, the game didn't really launch with a lot, and so you maybe played 1, 2, 3 campaigns, and then you got bored and you got done. So what have they done then in the relaunch to make it more interesting? So obviously we have the major factions, and we can see all the different major factions across the board here. During one of the updates, not in the Dynasties update, they added the Sea People faction. They play very differently. We're not going to go over them. We added Mesopotamia. That is Babylon and Assyria, the 2 enemies battling for control of Mesopotamia. Over here in the west, we have Agamemnon and we have Priam of Troy. These are showing up maybe 600 to 700 years too early. It's a little bit ahistorical, But what are you going to do? We don't really know much about this time period. We do know that these people kind of existed at some point in the Bronze Age. Maybe they could have existed now. To my knowledge, that's not when they did exist. But hell, you know, we know there was a Troy. We know there were Mycenaeans. Those are the Proto-Greeks. So we know that they're here. So great, we added more factions in the game. So now instead of just Egypt, Hatti, and Canaan, we now have Mesopotamia and the Aegean and the Sea Peoples. Now, here's where this gets really important. Within those factions now, we can now start to see minor factions. Now, the major factions have these cool characters with these portraits, with these faction summaries, with all these unique units and things they can have there. But if you're looking for more uniqueness and you're looking for more things you can do to start out a cool campaign, you can see these minor factions. Now, some of these characters might actually have unique models. Some of them might have unique voice lines and things like that, like Achilles over here. This is Achilles, this is Ajax, this is Odysseus, this is Rhesus. This is Sarpedon. So these were characters in the Iliad. They were kind of brought over from a different game, but they flesh out the map. So these minor factions have their own factional units. They have, well, they have the same native roster as anyone else. So native rosters are wherever location of the map are, you can get native units, but I'll get into that later. So already, I imagine that you guys can understand here that going from 8, yes, just 8. I'm talking literally just 8 factions you could pick. That was it. So that was it. That was literally you could pick to a considerable more amount. Each of these different factions have 8 minor factions. So we've already gone up 25 different starts from there. In addition, some of these some of the faction unit rosters can mix and match from different factions. For example, if you play over here on Cyprus, we can see that we have some Hittite units here, but we also have some Canaanite units here. And it kind of can make it a unique, diverse roster. Over here, we actually have a completely unique roster made up of Thracian units. In addition to that, over here, we can see the Libu Nomads using the Libu Nomad rosters. This is actually a completely different roster. Over here, these factional units are, once again, a different unit. The Aramaeans, with the, wow, I can't pronounce this, Alamu. The Alameans and the Alamu. So despite not having a huge roster here, they do have a factional roster of 6 units that are, you know, not all unique to them, but pretty unique to them. Over here, we can see another factional roster over here of the Urartu. Down here, we can see, who are these guys? The Elamites, and we can see some Elamite units over here. And up here, we can see some Sumerians. So even amongst these minor factions, some of them, while not having the most fleshed out roster, do have different starts and some different units within their factional roster. So just from the start, just from the ability to pick different starts and have different factional units, we can see a lot of different diversity here. Now, I'm not going to be going into the battles in this game, okay? The battles, as you might imagine, are a typical RTS battle. I might make another video on that later, but for now, I don't really want to focus on that. Typically, you've got, you know, you get an army and you're fighting another army. So your army enters the battle and it's going to, you know, obviously your army and their army are predefined, you know, depending on who you fought. So your army hits the field, their army hits the field. You've got spearmen, they've got spearmen or swordsmen or axemen or clubmen, probably slingers, probably archers, chariots, you know, think Bronze Age stuff here. The Sumerians do have some medium cavalry. The Elamites do have some horse archers. The Assur people do have some horse archers. But overall, you know, we're talking Bronze Age stuff here. We're talking spears, shields, chariots, slingers, archers. Not really that much diversity. It's Bronze Ages, right? So I'm just going to continue a campaign here so I can show you within a campaign. I'm playing a minor faction here, the Lycians. I believe it's pronounced Lycians. I thought it was always Lycia, but I guess it's the Lycians. These are people in the southwest of Anatolia. Now, there's a lot of things that you should hopefully understand here. The faction map, I shouldn't say the faction map. The map when this game released was not very big. Not very big at all. There wasn't really that much to do. You could go into Egypt and you could, well, I mean, Egypt, you just pushed north in Egypt and then you fought Hatti or you fought over Canaan, and that was pretty much it. Now, over here, you can see I'm on turn 51 of this campaign. It's taken me a long time, and I conquered this. I conquered all of this. Now, here's probably what a lot of you are thinking of right now. This is very zoomed in, and yes, this is very zoomed in. Despite me spending 51 turns and despite me spending a lot of time conquering all this stuff and pushing through all the defenses and things like that, this is not really a whole lot of the map. In fact, there's a lot more to do here. So the campaign map has been dramatically expanded, and there's a lot to do on this campaign map. If I wanted to play in Babylon, there'd be a lot more different types of units here. We could have some Arameans, some Elamites, some Asur people, some Sumerians. There'd be a lot different units than the units out here. The units out here tend to be very more armored, slower. I mean, we're talking Trojans and Greeks here. Okay, so we're talking armored, shield, spear, chariot, stuff like that. That's pretty common out here. Slingers are very, very, very common. Well, I'll get into that later. But as you can see here, the campaign map is very much bigger than it used to be, which makes it very more replayable and very more fun. Now, I'm going to kind of go through the campaign here and the campaign map. First thing we should talk about is, of course, at the top of my screen. What do you see? A lot of Total War games, all they have is money, cash, gold. That's it. You buy units with gold, you pay their upkeep in gold. Is that the same in this game? Obviously not, as you can see. We have food, stone, wood, bronze, gold, legitimacy, and dominance. I'll get into dominance later. That's very specific. That's kind of only for the Aegean people. Other factions have other things I need to go over. You can see each province, each city, in fact, each minor settlement, each major settlement can produce a different resource. Some of them can produce different things. Some of them can produce wood and food. Some of them can produce wood and food. But for the most part, if it's a major resource like bronze or gold, it's pretty much only going to produce that. So we go over here to Pharaoh. We have Pharaoh has a large gold mine. I also put the Royal Jeweler here, which is available on gold mines. That can add more gold to it, add influence, add happiness, blah, 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 blah. If I go into one of my armies here, we can see that units will have different upkeeps. This is a tier 6 elite super duper de-duper trooper here. Okay, he's got a large amount of bronze upkeep, a large amount of gold upkeep, and a super large amount of food upkeep. Versus this slinger, who's just a generic tier 1 slinger, just requires food. This tier 2 unit requires more food, but still just food. Now this chariot here does require even more food, but does only require bronze. Only these super high-end units will require gold. In other words, the higher tier you want to get your units, the more different resources you're going to want, meaning the more you're going to have to build up your economy and the more you're going to have to do this. Now, how does this really function in game turns? Means you're going to have to start specializing your economy, means you're going to have to start specializing your provinces. You might have some provinces where you can try to recruit high-tier, good, strong units. You might have some provinces where you're just trying to get all the resources out of it. You might have some provinces, like I've set up here, where I'm just trying to get a lot of food out of this. This is the Caria province. There's only 2 settlements here, and despite that, I've managed to get 1,450 food out of it. Compared to my other provinces, that's actually the most food of any of my provinces, despite only being 2 settlements here. So I've managed to specialize this one into getting food. Over here, we can see I have lots of gold, we have lots of bronze, we have stuff like that. So what do I do with these resources? The general idea of this game is that you want to build up your provinces as much as you can. You want to do all that, but it's a very diplomatic focused game compared to other Total Wars, which is something that has been improved in the Dynasties update, but has always kind of been in this game to begin with. It just, a lot of other things have made it better. Each faction has a culture. So if I go into diplomacy here, we can see the different cultures. Now, there are even smaller cultures in this, but we can see the Pelasgians, the Achaeans, the Hittites, the Aegean Sea Raiders, the Phrygians, the Sea Wanderers, the Thracians, etc., etc., etc. Now, within each culture group, so if I go here, Troy is a Pelasgian. I'm also a Pelasgian. You can confederate people within your culture, but that's not really what you want to do. So I currently have an active trade agreement. I give him 80 gold per turn, and he gives me 220 bronze per turn. That bronze, of course, I'm spending way more bronze than I'm making, but I also get a lot from battle, in looting and things like that. So I'm able to sort of equalize my bronze. Because of that, I'm able to put out many more higher tier troops than I could otherwise do. This army right here, as you saw here, we've got some tier 6 Giga Elite units. We've got some chariots. This army down here, there we go. You right here. I'm trying to click you. This army down here is some renowned Trojan slingers, which take bronze upkeep, more bronze upkeep. And that's kind of the name of the game. The higher tier your units, the more expensive they are, but the more resources you're going to need to manage. You're going to need to manage those resources through building the buildings on your own and collecting the resources on your own, or more importantly, probably trying to trade with people. It can often be more profitable to build up your land and get lots of resources out of your land and then trade with your neighbors. That can end up being more profitable than trying to conquer them, because this game is a very defensive game. Compared to other Total War games, this is a very defensive game. In 51 turns, you might be imagining, how did it take me 51 turns to conquer this? Rhodes was a fortress. Rhodes was a mega super fortress. There's many things in this game that force a more defensive playstyle. It can be very difficult to punch through the AI and actually get things down. The number one thing is garrisons are just way stronger than they are in other Total War games. The garrison buildings over here can add 5 units. Oh my god, 3 tier 4 units and 2 tier 4 units. It says 5 tier 4 units. This would be quite difficult for an enemy to break through. Tiers go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's tier 6, but those are super mega elite units. They're much harder to get. Blah, 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 blah. So it's much harder to play on the aggressive. In addition, in outposts, as we can see here, I built a fort on Tel Mesos. Forts are special buildings that force even further defensive play. If an AI has a fort, and they will always have forts. In fact, if I look over here, this guy has a fort and a lookout post, which I'll get into in a second. At either rate, this area has 20 garrison. Just to attack this stupid city would be 20 garrison, because he put a town watch here and he put a watchtower here. The watchtower adds even more garrison in here. You can go burn down the watchtower and reduce his garrison, but that will take even longer, because instead of walking up and taking the city, I will now have to run out and burn down the watchtower, then run to the city. But actually I'll have to burn down the watchtower, then go burn down the fort, then I can probably take the city. Why is that? Because forts will automatically defend. If I can show you here, a fort, no matter how far away, will automatically defend the city. Can I see here? There we go. A fort will automatically supply its city with its troops. You can put up to 10 troops in a fort and they have minus 50% upkeep so long as they're in that fort. So if I was to try to attack Kerwalia right now, it would be, let me go look at this, with no defending army whatsoever. We would have to fight through some of the highest tier. These are all tier 4 and tier 3 giga units, and then he didn't put that many in his fort, I'll give you that, but he put a chariot and then a commander unit in that fort. I would have to fight 22 units in a city defense to get through here. That would not be possible with anything less than a super high army. So I'll have to probably bring in 2 armies here. Why then is it difficult for me to just bring in 2 armies? Why, with all this land, do I only have 3 armies? Because this game is very anti-snowball. It wants to keep the player honest. It wants to keep the player from expanding too quickly. How does it manage that? And I will go into differences in the campaign. I just want to kind of talk about the campaign as a whole right now, because it has this administration tier. The more you expand, the higher tier units you get. And in fact, can I show you that right here? I believe I can. If I go to recruit, we can see here are some special recruitment units. Special recruitment units, these tier 5 units. In fact, let me see if I can show you on my army itself, because that actually might be easier. Yes, we can see here, tier 5 giga units cost 5 administration. Tier 1 crappers cost 1 administration. Tier 2 crappers cost 1 administration. Tier 3 somewhat good units cost 2 administration. So a tier 5 super mega elite unit costs 5 times as much administration as tier 1 and tier 2 crappers. Now, what do these different administration tiers do? At administration tier 1, meaning you just started the game, your bronze and food upkeep is reduced by 25%. At the tier I'm at, my bronze and food upkeep is increased by 10 and 20%. At the next tier, it would be increased by 15 and 30%. In other words, the more armies you get, the more you expand your empire, the more and more upkeep you pay. It's difficult. The game tries to keep you around having lots of low tier armies or a few high tier armies. Now, no matter how big you get, it wants to try to keep you honest and keep you smaller. This keeps the diplomatic game going. This keeps a more defensive playstyle going. Now, maybe the AI is a little bit too defensive, and that's something we might be able to talk about later. Maybe it doesn't build up its own economy enough, and maybe it focuses too much on making it very difficult to conquer them. But that's a problem I can get into later. At either rate, the game is very very diplomatic compared to other Total War games, and is very much based around building up your provinces, getting rich, and then trading away for resources to get a lot of good units, so then you can go use those good units to go beat the crap out of your lesser equipped neighbors. Now, when the game launched, everything I was just saying didn't really apply that much. I mean, it did apply, but there wasn't as many different cultures. There wasn't as much different cultural warfare between, let's say, the Trojans and the Achaeans are in this huge war because they kind of don't like each other and they keep fighting each other. We can see here that Mycenae, and I'll get into some issues with this later, Mycenae managed to take over all of Troy's original territory, but Troy also did kind of manage to get down here and conquer some of Greece. It got down here, you know, but overall, it does look like the Trojans and that culture have overall lost, let's say, the Trojan War, and the Mycenaeans own the faction I'm at war with up here. This is actually another Mycenaean faction that seems to have taken over a huge chunk of Anatolia. And just a cultural war between these different, much smaller on the world map cultures makes the game way more interesting. So what different diplomacy can we then do? What different things have they added into the game? Well, we can talk here. Marriages. See, when the game relaunched under Dynasties, you might be wondering, well, it relaunched under Dynasties. What does that mean, it relaunched under Dynasties? Well, that means you have a family, and that means you have a ruling family. See, I started as Sarpedon. My son, Elishub, was on the map. He was a general. He could die in battle. He never did because he had a really good bodyguard and he fought really well. Elishub marries Samiwia. This is the Bronze Age. I'm sorry, people. I'm offending all the Bronze Age people. And I actually have a dynasty tree. So I can marry different people. We can marry into different families, and we can try to get different alliances, and we can try to get different dynasties going. So if I look over here, I know that this is a Trojan faction. I could try to, actually, it doesn't look like they have any marriages available here. Now, there are quick diplomacy deals, but I can try to find a marriage match. I want to find a female match. Troy has one. So let's go talk to Troy. I want to request a diplomatic marriage. I want to marry my general off to Cruza. Why? Just because. I'm going to marry my general to one of the female characters of Troy. Let's propose this. And you can see right now we're at trending towards 11 relations. If I accept this, we're now trending towards 26 relations. The diplomatic marriage with Troy has now enabled us to get 15 more relations with Troy. This is generally a good thing. This allows you to make much tougher alliances. This allows you to work with the AI way more. This allows you to find a friend in the world, someone to help you against the AI constantly declaring war on you and trying to murder you. It also is actually enforced through many different things. I'm just going to go from the top over here, and we're going to try to talk about all the different campaign mechanics in this game and what's different from it and Total Warhammer, what's different from it and other games like it. So as our faction leader, he could die in battle. If he dies in battle, who becomes our next faction leader? Well, no one right now. We don't have a scion right now. Huh. If you don't choose manually, a presumptive scion, oldest male offspring of the faction leader will be chosen. Manually choosing a scion overrides presumptive scions while the current faction leader resigns. I don't think he's going to resign. I think he's going to die. So he's got 2 brave, cultured. I'm not really sure what any of this means, but sure, go for it. So here's my faction leader. Now this is my victory objective. This isn't really that important. This is just a kind of a way to keep people on track. I currently have not a lot of victory objectives. This is just for tracking, and eventually you'll probably get bored of a campaign and you want to get your ultimate victory. Each different thing you do can get you different victory points. It's not really that important. So let's talk about then Royal Decree. This is your tech tree, typical tech tree stuff. Some different factions have different tech trees, like the Aegeans, I think, have their own tech tree. The Trojans and the Greeks seem to have a different tech tree. The Babylonians have a little bit of a tech tree. I think the original factions share their own tech tree. It's not really that big a deal. They can do different things, and it does take a long time to get through this tech tree, so you kind of need to choose where to go and specialize. I've been mostly using a lot of melee units. So I've been focusing on kind of going to the right and buffing up my melee units and getting them to be stronger and more powerful. You could also go down here and buff up your chariots. You could go over here and buff up your bowmen. There's some good buffs to bowmen. You kind of get that idea, right? Okay, so then you can't really giga conquer everyone. You need to work with everyone. Does that get boring? not boring. There is the tree here. Now, this is the Aegean court. Generally speaking, okay, there are some missing textures that appear randomly. That will happen, but you can see the court system here. All the 4 different main cultures have different court systems. There's the Egyptian court, the Hatti court, the Aegean court, and the Babylonian court. I think it's called the Babylonian court. So the Mesopotamian court. And they all function slightly differently. I've just been starting to kind of figure out how to use them. I'm currently the leader. Not really because I wanted to be, just because I inherited it, because I was just the strongest. It was kind of annoying. Okay, you can see here the mixing textures are here, but let's imagine the textures weren't missing here. Within the court, the strongest characters in this area of the world will generally be here. You can do different actions against them. Perform intrigue, make request, make a demand, plot against, etc., etc. I'm gonna be honest, some different courts can do different things. Overall, it's not really that important. Each turn you can do a different action. So I gossip, court action, Lycia gained the position of Wanax. I didn't really want to do that, but okay. Court action, gossip. This turn I sold my action. This turn I can take a new action. So I could plot against this dude. I could try to blackmail him and get regard and a little bit of his gold. I could try to discredit him. I could start a plot. It steals his legitimacy. Overall, I think the Aegean court's not really that important. The most important thing seemed to be requesting elite warriors from these people. The elite warriors is how you get those tier 6 units. I don't know if the Egyptian courts are different, but in this one at the very least, I can recruit these special units right here. Let me see, can I? Yeah, so I can't. You've recruited the maximum number of units to this army. Okay, well you can see here, I have the Greek elite units available to me and the Troy elite units available to me. I think also there are Thracian elite units that you can get, but I haven't seen those ones yet. At either rate, these are the tier 6 Giga units. You can get those for your court action. You can kind of play around and do diplomacy with other people through here. Okay, my textures are back. As a Wanax, I can throw them out of court. You can see here, position benefits. I always have elite units in special recruitment. Intrigues against this position cost additional gold regard. Plots against them have lower success chance. I get 20 legitimacy. Position benefits for Lawagetas is additional recruitment slot, army spread influence, increased movement speed and melee attack for all bodyguard units. So these different positions, visit sacred lands to gain resources, lower building costs. They can plot to embezzle. The Oracle gains more favor. So, you know, blah, 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 blah. It's not really... The courts are okay. Some courts are more important. I think like the Egyptian courts, the Mesopotamian courts. The Aegean court seems to mostly be about getting elite unit recruitment. You know, it's a thing. They tried, you know, they got 4 different courts. They didn't really have much money to do anything special with this last big relaunch. The game had kind of failed for the most part. So they were trying to get the game into a good spot. I'm not going to defend the Aegean court. It does not seem to be the most interesting. But, you know, it's what I got here. I got power of the crown. Because I'm the Wanax, I can do different things. I decided for my 2 powers here. Now, you do have different royal powers when you're the Wanax. I get these 2 unique items I can use on my characters. But I also got royal powers. What royal powers did I choose? There's 5 different types. I chose competency. 1 competency point will become available to spend on any character on every cooldown. Effectively, every 12 turns I can level up a character for free. It's not amazing, but it's okay. I also have remote colonization. I can colonize abandoned settlements remotely or at a near distance. I used it to colonize over here. It's every 8 turns you can colonize just for resources. So you can see over here, if I had the resources for it and it was off cooldown, I could colonize this province for food, wood, and stone. I could just colonize this without sending an army. It's neat, I guess. It's okay. It's a nice way to nab land after the sea people raise stuff into the ground. It's not that amazing, but it's kind of an additional aspect of the court system once you become the strongest in the land. There's other royal powers you can choose, and as I continuously get more legitimacy by trying to steal it, I could use the court to try to steal legitimacy and get more powers here. So you can understand that I don't really understand a lot of this game fully as is. Maybe some of the court powers later on become way more powerful. We'll see. Now, each character on each run can choose one path to power. What is a path to power? Well, as we mentioned, it's very hard to conquer people. So what are you going to do? You want to have war, right? But you can't always be doing war stuff all the time. Now, your path to power, your way of life, or whatever you call it, each time you start a new run, you can choose one path to power, or way of life, or philosophy, whatever. Now, each different court has different versions of them. So if you're the Egyptians, you can focus on trade and get a unique, it's not quite the caravan system from Total War, but basically you can load up a cart with your resources, wood, food, some of your ancillaries, maybe even some of the weapons you've caught. You can load them up on a cart, turn them into trade points, go to another city and try to find things at that city to turn your trade points into stuff. So you can transport, let's say, 5,000 food, and then 2 turns later, you come back with 8,000 food because you found a good bargain. Or maybe that 5,000 food becomes a cool sword. Or maybe it becomes a really cool ancillary that reduces the bronze upkeep. Or maybe you turn that into wood. Maybe you couldn't find a good wood trading partner and you just found a lot of wood using food. It's one thing the Egyptians can do. The Egyptians can also focus their way of life on building monuments. What do the Greeks have? They have dominance. What is dominance? The Greeks can do 2 different things. They can focus either on having really good alliances, and then if they have an alliance with someone, they can recruit their units anywhere on the map, which is really good, obviously, as you can imagine. It's good to be able to recruit your allies' special units onto your armies. But the second way you can go about it, you could form, again, the first way is to form giant military alliances, be able to control your allies, have these giant coalition wars, etc. The second way is, of course, the dominance. Now, what does dominance do? Whenever you're at war with somebody, you now get these dominance points here. And we can see what I can generate. I have 300 out of 300 because I was not very good at using it. Sorry. But you can see I'm at war with Ephesus here. So I can generate dominance doing different actions. Defeat the faction leader in battle gives me 40. Conquering their capital settlement gives me 80. If I raid 800 food, I get 30. If I raise or sack a settlement, I get 10. If I kill a general, 35. Raise an outpost, 35. If I carry out a successful plot against them, I get 10. And if I achieve every one of these dominance objectives, I get a random unique follower ancillary. So what can I do with dominance? Well, there's a few different things here. So you can use it in this thing. I'm not really sure how. I'm gonna be real with you. I can't tell if I'm supposed to be getting it with these royal powers or something. Ruler's dominance. I guess you can just spend dominance to get legitimacy. Legitimacy of support. I don't really know. That's not really important. This is the 90% of what you're gonna do with dominance is diplomacy. What does dominance do during diplomacy? I can now spend my dominance to do a trade deal. So let's say I want to go to, I don't even know, Troy. Let's say I want to go to Troy and I want to buy, what do you have? You have a lot of food. So let's say I want to go to Troy and I want to buy 2,000 food. And so I get 2,000 food a turn. And I want to give him, I don't know, what do I have a lot of? Stone. So let's give him like 100 stone a turn. Okay, maybe not. I don't know, maybe let's do like 500 stone a turn. So I give him 500 stone a turn. In return, I get 2,000 food. He doesn't want to do this deal, obviously, because he goes, this is really dumb. Why would I give you 2,000 food for 500 stone? But then I can apply dominance. And dominance gives me plus 25 reasons for him to ever accept the deal. If any faction is weaker than me, I can spend these dominance points I've built up. In this case, I can spend 100 dominance to make him accept this deal. And now he accepts the deal. So I spend 500 stone a turn and I get 2,000 food. Using my dominance, I was able to kind of bully him into giving me a more fair trade deal. More fair for me, that is. Now, as you might imagine, you can do this for anything. So if I want this guy to become my vassal, it's negative 28. But using dominance, I can turn this into a negative 3. Making it work, I can then spend a little bit of resource and I can turn this guy into my vassal. Ta-da! So now what I can do, because he's my vassal, I can offer a character to leave your faction and become the scion of this dude. So I can choose one of my generals. Let's say Parayawatra. Now this guy's my most powerful general, and I can give this guy to this faction, and should this guy die, this guy becomes the leader of that faction, which in return will give me even more relations and basically guarantee that this faction is my permanent ally for a very, very long time. Now, obviously, I don't want to do that because he's my most powerful general, and because he's my vassal, there's really no reason to ever go through with this. But because of this, I can now get closer and closer to Confederation. Now, can you use dominance on Confederations? No, of course you can. No, seriously, actually you can. It does double the cost of dominance, but you can use dominance to try to confederate people even easier. That means if you're playing one of these Mediterranean factions, you can use the dominance system to get much easier confederations onto the other Trojans or the other Achaeans. Or if you're playing Thrace, onto the other Thracians, but there's only 3 of them, so what does it really matter? And you can use this system, and you can try to play through this different way of warfare. You know, you can try to do these different objectives, and you can try to build up dominance to try to do more diplomacy. I should say better diplomacy, and that's just kind of what you do with it. So it's not the only way to play the game, but it is, you know, kind of a different way to play the game. Let me try to load up a different campaign here. Let me see if I have one. Okay, so I do have a Bay campaign. And I'll show you the trade system real quick. So instead of dominance, instead of forcing people into diplomacy, instead of bullying people through war, to bully other people through diplomacy. I mean, that's the best way to think about it. I'm bullying some dude by killing him so that I can bully other people into giving me better trade deals. It's interesting, sure. But what if I don't want to do that? What if I just want to be a trader? So here we can see right here. This is the trade system. The totally different system. Each faction gets to choose one thing. So I click on here and I decide, okay, so what do we have to offer here? Asuwa. What does Asuwa have? They have cedar chariots, which can give me recruitment cost reduction for chariots for 6 turns. Fine chlaumies, an ancillary that can give me 2 happiness. Or, uncommon ancillary chance, they can also potentially have bronze statuettes, giving me influence to the province. Ancillary that increases the aura for the morale boost on a general, the workforce growth in a province around them. Figs, which can give hella one-time food income. We can see here gold recruitment cost reduction on the army. Upkeep reduction for 6 turns of upkeep reduction for every army in a province, which stacks with every other upkeep reduction, allowing me to potentially have very cheap armies through trading. We can see wood income, blah, 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 blah. Over here at Achaea, we can see heavy ropes, which allows us to attack forts much better and easier. Granite blocks, which could give 6 turns of construction cost reduction to a province. Or we could trade down here and punt. At punt, we could see obsidian tools and blades, which could give XP per turn to the entire army. So then how do I do that? How do I get these trade points? How do I trade with these people? Let's say we go over here. I want to load up my cart. So I load up my cart, and you can see it's 400 food can become 10 trade points. And I load up the cart on wood and food. Now at 200 value, that's about it. So I load up the cart, I take my food, I take 5,600 food, 180 wood, and I send out an expedition. And in a few days, I will then be able to check what goods were actually at that province. And then after checking what goods were at that province, I can go, oh, that's cool. And then I can try to trade my goods for their goods. Or, alternatively, once again, let's load up an Ursu game I had here. I made Ursu go with the Mesopotamian court. Mesopotamian court has a completely different path to power here. The Mesopotamian court. Now, by the way, just to be clear, there were paths to power in the original Total War Pharaohs, but all these ones, the Aegean one is new. This one here with the Mesopotamia is new. In the base game, a long time ago, basically you could either build buildings or you could trade, and that was it. That was like every run. So what do I do in this one? We pass laws. How do we get that? We need Kuduru. We need law power. I don't know. So what we can do here is we can pass laws. Now laws can be civic or military laws. This one's probably the most video gamey and probably the one I like the least. But yeah, so we can see here that for swordsmen, I passed the law of swordsmen are fast and get more XP and have more melee defense. Don't ask, it's super video gamey. Next, I'm passing the law of two-handed spearmen get melee defense, melee attack, and speed. Don't ask. it's super video gamey. It's probably the most video gamey, but what are you gonna do? By generating Kuduru, I can continuously increase the strength of the laws I can pass for military. How do I generate Kuduru? That comes through the court system. Well, you see here, I can request elite warriors from this guy once again, but I can also request things like temple builders for reduced cost of temples, or I can perform intrigue to discuss law. Now, I can discuss law with any of these characters, but it does take a little bit of what is this called? Regard. They need to actually like you a little bit to discuss law. This generates 2 Kuduru. So I can spend my time in court, and I get 1 court extra in a turn trying to generate regard with this character, and then I can use that regard to generate more. Well, you can see here, all my court actions are discussing law to get Kuduru. There's no plots against me. There's no plots against other people. I don't think I even have a position at court, probably because I'm not even in Mesopotamia, but you get the idea, right? So if I'm playing as this faction, I could spend my time trying to get regard to pass laws. Now this is kind of unique because the Canaanites can choose to go with any of the different court systems, but you get the idea, right? The general idea here is there's a lot of different things you can do. So let's go back here for a second to Lycia then. Now, it's all well and good that you can all do those different things, but okay. How is the actual playing of the game then? How is the actual building your settlements, fighting the battles, fighting the AI? How is all that? Okay, I'm gonna talk about the goods and the bads here. Okay, the goods. Let's start with the goods. Building up your settlement. There are a lot of different buildings. You will generally not be able to build all these different buildings. As we can see, different areas of the map will have different resources. Myra, for example, can have a grain field, a livestock pasture, a fishing ground, and a lumber shack. If it has the grain field, it can then also build a fruit garden. Fruit garden needs a grain field. So I can have a grain field and a fruit garden. Fruit garden gives me even more food and workforce growth and happiness. Workforce is, you need workforce to get buildings. Higher level buildings need more workforce. So workforce growth is, generally speaking, how quickly the settlement can build up. So grain fields give you food and workforce growth. Fruit gardens give you happiness, food income, and workforce growth, which obviously might be a lot. And then you could get livestock pens. Well, actually, you'd have to stay at the fishery because it's a port, so it has to do royal fishery, which seems bizarrely weak, and I'm not really sure why they made it so weak, but what are you going to do? Or alternatively, you can do what I did, and you could go grain farms, keep the royal fishery, and then get oak storage. Oak storage gives you wood. Wood is really rare in this game. Who would know? Who would suspect that in a game where a third of the game is in Egypt and the desert, that wood might be a valuable resource that you can trade away to other people for a lot of gold? There's not really that many building slots, as you can imagine. If we go to Telmosos, there's a unique building here, the Lycian Stables. There's also different temples you can get for the different gods you worship. They all do the same thing, but I believe, yeah, you can have different barracks here. You can have different military support, production buildings, all that sort of stuff. If you want to have really good military support, you can have recruitment slots and recruitment rank. This is obviously very powerful if you want to get out a very large high tier army built. Work offers reduces recruitment cost and construction cost. It's kind of worthless. It's not worth a building slot at all. Over here you can see the city guard compound, which gives you huge garrisons, morale to all your armies in the garrison, or no, sorry, your entire armies in the region. It gives you longer siege holdout time to the entire region, gives you happiness, gives you ammunition to all your armies, makes defending the city very powerful. Here we can see the Royal Officer School gives you more ranks on your generals. Every time you recruit them, gives you XP per turn to your generals. So if you have generals that are maybe trying to sit around and defend a province, they can still level up. Gives massively reduced recruitment cost. Over here, and we will go on because there are a lot of them, we can see a building that gives you happiness, a building that gives you large replenishment and workforce growth. Over here, we can see the visitors' quarters, makes armies moving through this land move way quicker, reduces construction time on your outposts. The important ones to manage then, as you might be imagining here, you know, is this interesting then? Okay, shut up with all this boring stuff. Is this interesting? Well, yeah, actually. So you can see here I chose, again, the fruit gardens in my capital because this is trying to be a giant food province. We went with the temple because it gives me plus 10% production and a little bit of happiness, so that's generally good. Over here, what I'm eventually going to do is choose the food production building. This gives us food plus 20% in the entire province. Over here in management, I can also choose, if I'm not blind, here we go, the Royal Tax Administration, which reduces our happiness by 2, but gives us production 20% on old resources. We can stack lots of production modifiers while stacking only food, and eventually we can get this province to produce a lot of food. So then, what about recruitment places? Well, where do we get the best recruitment? As you might imagine, the best way to get recruitment is with copper. Okay, so any province that has copper can also, as we can see here, build a special military support building called the Bronze Proving Hall. Bronze Proving Hall reduces the recruitment cost of bronze in any unit, gives us recruitment rank plus 2. Okay, so that's not very amazing, you might say. Recruitment rank plus 2, that's not that big a deal. I don't really care about that. Okay, you know what? I don't care about that either. But here's the thing. There's a special building in production that gives you, as you can see this right here, 10 armor on recruitment for every unit built out of this province. And armor in this game is highly impactful. I'm not going to get into why, but armor in this game functions slightly differently, and even 10 armor can be a pretty big difference. And it increases bronze income by 20% in the entire province. It does reduce your happiness by 2 still. So if you're in a bronze province, you can get this building and increase the bronze output of the province, while also giving 10 armor to the entire army. But that's another building slot. As you can imagine, with only 7 building slots, and a lot of times a dock using one of those. Docks are very weak. Ports are very weak. I'm not sure why they're so weak. Does seem to be an actual problem. Ports kind of seem like a debuff more so than a buff. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure why they did that, but it's just the way it is. As you can see, with the limited provinces, or sorry, with the limited buildings, you kind of need to specialize your provinces, and you kind of need to make sure that your empire works as a total whole. You can't have more generic provinces that just use the 5% production, but you can also have more specialized provinces that have, for example, 15% more food at -2 happiness. So in a food province, I need to keep my happiness up. I need to keep my influence up, but I also need to make sure that I'm producing a lot of food. And that kind of becomes the thing. You need a lot of food. As you can see here, even though I'm getting 3.3 thousand food from diplomacy, I'm still 2.7 thousand in the whole of turn. Now, I will make most of that back through warfare, but eventually there might come a point in time where fighting other players, or not other players, but I should say other AI, maybe isn't enough, and maybe I need enough food generation on my own. It is not this day, and it probably won't be any time in the future, but hey, maybe eventually, I guess. At either rate, we probably need more bronze. We need stuff to trade away for bronze. If we made a lot of food, maybe we could trade, well, now the AI never needs food because the AI cheats, but you kind of get the idea. So then, is the army building, is the warfare good? Yes, I would say. So for those of you guys who have played a lot of Total War games, and for those of you guys who might not play a lot of Total War games, I would give you the little secret. Most people make their armies out of 2 or 3 units just repeated. Sorry to say. So for my main army over here, I do have some elite units kind of filling it out, but you can see the majority of the army is Eastern Spearmen and Slingers, and then a couple chariots. These are just elite units. This army over here, mostly Eastern Spearmen, a bunch of Slingers, and then you can see I have some heavy shock spears over here. For the most part, yes, you're going to build most of your armies out of a couple units, maybe a couple specialized units, but, you know, you got mostly the frontliners, the backliners, the flankers. That's generally how you're going to play your army out. Now, there are a lot of different native units. Now, native units are, generally speaking, what's the right way to put this? Native units are generally units that are found in a certain area. So Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt, the Western Desert, Nubia, Sinai, Fenku, Highlands, Lowlands, Achaia, Thrace, blah, 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 blah. So the Thracian natives, just as one example here, let me go find, where do I have my Thracian natives building? Here it is right here. So at each different tier, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, there's no tier 5 natives, but let's say at tier 2 natives, I can get the Coastal Club Fighters, the Eastern Spearmen, and the Azawan Archers. In other words, Thrace specializes pretty heavily. Even if you don't own any buildings here, Thrace, you can always get the Aswan Warriors and the Aswan Slingers. Thrace will always have pretty good slingers. These tier 1 slingers are still decent. 210 range, which is pretty long by Total War standards. So you can use these slingers to try to target other archers to keep your melee safe. The Eastern Spearmen, the Thracian defensive giant spear unit, doesn't do much damage, but is enormously tanky. These Vet 6 dudes have 65 melee defense on a tier 2 unit, 75% missile block, and the ability to shield wall. If they shield wall, they get another 25 missile block for 100% missile block. Now, they won't do much damage while in a spear wall because they're just going to be sitting there defending, but they will knock out charges. Enemies will be able to whittle them away in melee because a spear wall doesn't allow you to Ironically, in this game, a spear wall doesn't let you fight back very much, but these Eastern Spearmen will tank like champions. If you're playing in the Troy area, you're relying on these spearmen. Now, does that mean you have a lot of faction unit diversity? Not really. I mean, if you're playing in Troy, you're probably going to have one strategy. Giant walls of spears, and then slingers behind them to knock out the enemy's range, and then to focus down their melee. You could have different factional units. So as you can see here with my different factional building here, starting at tier 3, I can get shielded Giga Spear Warriors. I can get the Aswan Swordsmen to have actual damage dealing melee. The Anatolian Chariots are also a pretty good unit. Over here at tier 4, we got the Heavy Shock Spears. These are two-handed spears that can charge, and they just charge the spear right into someone's chest. They don't use a shield, but they are decently armored, coming up at 60 armored. They're not very fast, but they tend to hunt down low armored enemies and just absolutely massacre them. That means if they rear charge enemies or things like that, they can absolutely destroy them. Very effective. And then we have lots of chariots. My faction, the Lycians, focus on large, very tanky spear walls, slingers to pick off the enemy's range, then chariots running in behind to charge them from behind. It's not that complicated, but that's generally what we do. If you play the Cimmerians, you're generally going to focus on, well, horses and horse stuff. If you play the Greeks, you're going to focus on javelins. Greek javelins are very scary. They have a 1/2 chance on hit to just kill any unit outright on the first hit on their heavy javelins. It's terrifying. I've been routed. Heavy javelins are the only unit in any Total War game where the AI has beaten me in 3 minutes. I had the AI, for some reason, just stacked heavy javelins. Before I quite understood what they were, they stacked nothing but heavy javelins, ran them up, and because each javelin toss has a 1/2 chance to kill a unit outright with its lethality modifier, they routed me in 3 minutes by doing so much damage so quickly. My units mass routed, and in this game, morale compounds pretty hard. So if one unit starts routing, it encourages another unit, which encourages another unit. I mass routed in a heavy javelin throw. It was kind of scary. Now, what are the downsides of this system? Because unit diversity within a faction is not too high, the AI will generally understand what's the best units to be spamming, and it will actually start spamming those, which can get a bit old. If you're fighting Trojans, what do you suspect you're going to be fighting? That's right, you're going to be fighting always Anatolian Chariots and renowned Trojan Slingers. The Chariots will try to ram into your melee and kill them, because Anatolian Chariots are very good at ramming into melee and killing them, and the Trojan Slingers will try to sling down and kill any of your tougher melee units that could resist a charge. And because the renowned Trojan Slingers have a shield, and are not amazing, but 35 armor, so they don't die instantly to an archer volley, it does mean that this is actually not even a bad spam. This is actually a good spam. This is a very tough stack to beat, but you will be fighting this stack a lot when you fight Trojans. This is a downside of this game. They did increase faction diversity, but remember, when it was like the Hittites, the Canaanites, and the Egyptians, there were only like 3 different types of people you'd be fighting. There was Sudan, the Kushites, the Nubians. They are very strong archers. They're like the strongest archers in the game. They're crazy. But, you know, you would rarely fight them because, well, they're all the way down here. So if I'm playing in Hatti, or I'm playing the Canaanites, or I'm even playing in Upper Egypt, the chances that I'd be fighting these people are quite low. So the game at launch only had like 3 enemies you could fight. even now we can see, because here's one diplomatic option. If you're wondering why I can see them, it's because I bought the embed informant for 200 gold. You can get information on a faction for 5 turns. So let's see, does that give me vision on what's in his armies? I wonder. Can I see any of his armies? No. Okay, well, it does mean that if you fight Trojans, early in the game, you're going to be fighting slingers and the two-handed clubmen. Later in the game, you're going to be fighting mostly chariots and Trojan slingers. It is a downside, but it is better than it was at launch because, you know, you do have different cultures because you have lots more minor factions. You could fight Libyan units, the very squishy, low armor, but fast and damaging melee. You could be fighting Sumerians with their horses. You could be fighting Babylonians with their endless waves of human meat attacks. You could fight Asur with their archers that do very high damage. Again, you've still got the Nubians, you got the Egyptians. So you got a lot more things in the game, but within each faction, you will be fighting very similar units. Now, that's not to say every Trojan will do this. If there is Troy itself, they might use different units. I'm not saying they will, but they could. Because, you know, factional units, you can see, well, I mean, you can't actually see it here, I guess, but my factional units that you saw here, so there's native units and there's factional units. My factional units allow me to get more chariots and more heavy spears. So my factional, if you are fighting the Lycian faction, it might have different units than a generic Trojan faction. I can't promise that, but it might. But the AI is pretty good, ironically, at kind of figuring out the developer's balance. And the AI has kind of pieced it together in its head. Boy, these Anatolian chariots do a lot of damage. And boy, these slingers are quite good at range. What if I built nothing but chariots and slingers? Yeah. In addition to that, one problem with the building system that you might have been noticing is that the AI loves to build giga defensive mega forts everywhere. Now, it does keep the game slower paced and it does keep the game a bit more honest, but it also means that the AI tends not to scale as well because every place they just put giga mega defenses. It also means that it can be eventually, once you're out of the early game, it can start feeling a bit sloggy to get through stuff. Because you can see here, they put down the city guard compound, and they put down their lookout post, and they put down the fort. They didn't fill the fort, but, you know, going through here, I'm going to need 2 armies to take down this settlement. Now, if you're into that, if you're into very slow-paced games where you need to bring out your armies, where you need to be defending all your settlements, setting up proper defenses, setting up ambushes to take out armies. If you're into that, this game is right up your alley. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not into that. In fact, I can be. I sometimes very much enjoy it. But the AI can tend to set up giga mega defensive cities. Then this time it's doing it a little bit maliciously, but it can run smaller armies. This is a bit too small. It doesn't do this. Don't think this is the norm. But it can run armies of, let's say, 8 to 12 behind your lines with the intent of sacking your outposts and forcing you to bring back an army to eventually stop them. Now, some of the tech trees, we can see, this is called Royal Decree, but, you know, it's stuff here. We can see here, armies with 10 or fewer units through this tech tree can get an ambush chance, plus 30%, and they can get movement on land, plus 20%. I have seen the AI actually set up ambush traps before. Actual ambush traps. I was shocked. I didn't fall for it because I was watching it do it, but I saw it put a unit in force march and then ambush a second army behind the force marching army. I was shocked because that's like something a player will do to an AI. And when I saw the AI do that, I was actually I was like, holy crap, that's funny. Didn't fall for it, but I was like, holy crap, that's funny. So you can see here, these are the Trojan tech trees. So the Trojans do have potentially buffs here. We can see melee defense. Yeah, if your generals are high level, they can get more melee defense. Blah, 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 blah. We can also see here, this is something about the campaign map that is kind of cool too. I'll go over this. I didn't go over this for a second. Depending on how good or how bad civilization is doing, you can start getting buffed. Now, you can start getting an actual Bronze Age collapse if everything starts getting sacked. This kind of goes into one of the problems, though, that the game has. The AI really is not good at resettling provinces. We can see Crete is half destroyed. Despite the AI having armies right here that could resettle it, giving Troy new land, allowing Troy potentially to rebuild and actually be relevant. They're just not. They're just not doing anything. They just don't do anything. They just never resettle this land, which is super weird and jank and actually really annoying to deal with. However, the less settled the land is, the less the civilization state will be. Right now, there's prosperity, and there's like 3 modifiers. So the middle one, where you get a slight debuff, prosperity, where you get basically no buff but no debuff, then crisis, where the civilized countries are kind of dying. The original idea was that the sea people would try to run out and sack everything. The sea people are way weaker than they should be. They're massively undertuned. However, they do get buffed a little bit by these modifiers, just not as much as you're hoping. The players under the middle, where you'll be spending probably the majority of the game, get -10 replenishment, -10% morale, and more resources from raising, which encourages the AI to raise buildings, which encourages them to lower the civilization state. And then eventually you enter crisis and things get really bad and can potentially campaign end you. The sea people get more buffs depending on how low the civilization state is. But again, they're very undertuned. You can actually see a raid he did here with a mere 8 units. I can just run out here and kill him. This is a great sea people raid. This is what ended civilization. This is what destroyed everything. Here's actually something important though. I'm wondering if it's gonna do it. It probably won't do it. This is something for Total War players that play this game a lot. Another thing that keeps this game honest and keeps this game playing for a long time, if you do not have a massive advantage on an opponent and you auto-resolve, this plays into the campaign map. If you have a slight advantage, the auto-resolve will not wipe out their army fully. It will just damage their units. It simulates playing out the battle more, and it means that having a slight advantage does not allow you to completely wipe out an opponent's army to a man, which you would never be able to do in a normal battle anyway, which allows the enemy AI to retreat, to replenish, to continue to play out wars. It keeps wars more interesting, longer. It's a good change. It's a very good change. I like it. Nothing but a positive. Having the tiniest advantage shouldn't allow you to auto-resolve in Warhammer and kill an enemy to a man. You can also see here, by the way, the sea lanes. You can see how I can move further along the sea lane. One more problem with the AI, and it did it right here, so I can actually show it in real time in 4K. The AI still has that problem that they do in a lot of Total War games. They run up and sack your city rather than just take it. This AI, with its giga top tier stack of old tier 3 units, decided not to just conquer this city, but instead sack it, in which case next turn it might conquer it. I don't know why it did that. Well, I do know why it did that. Bad AI coding. And because of the two problems I just mentioned here, their very low ability, or I should say programming to resettle land, combined with their tendency towards raising and sacking cities rather than conquering them, means that as you kind of do what I do and you get out of the early game and you get to turn 50 and you start experiencing the campaign map, it does have the typical Total War problem where you will start running into the issue of you're the strongest on the map. Now, I am only strength rank 13, so I do know a lot of AI have been doing good. I'm only playing on very hard. Very hard is basically impossible, unless you're kind of crazy. The AI cheats will be really bad. 3, maybe even 4 AI will declare on you. It is very hard. This game is quite difficult. There's no legendary lord. There's no giga stat army or anything like that. If you want to get high tier troops, you got to pay for high tier troops. You can't take Eastern Spearmen, and you can buff them. You can vet them. You can try to find some buffs here. So here's one thing. If you have a woodcutter's lodge, a master carpenter gotten from a woodcutter's lodge, this building will give +3 melee damage to one-handed spears on recruitment. So this province up here will give me pretty good Eastern Spearmen. What is the downside? It only gives it to them on recruitment. So the ones I recruited before getting this building don't count. Now it's +3 damage, and that's good, but this is nowhere near Warhammer stat stacking. In Warhammer, your tier 1, tier 2, even your tier 3 units could be stat buffed so hard that they will trash the AI into the absolute ground. Can you level up your commanders and make them unstoppable killing machines? I mean, as you can see here, you can make their bodyguard pretty good, but you can't make them unstoppable killing machines. You can put points in different things. Now, you can see here, if you put points into fortitude, you can get battle loot and replenishment. At each threshold, you get a little bit more. So this gives melee defense 3 to the entire army. This one gives melee defense 6, and it gives my bodyguards the ability to get shields up, reducing their speed, but allowing them to get 50% more shield block, allowing even medium shields to reach 100% shield block. The AI loves to target your commanders. This ability is quite good. If you go into presence, you can reduce the upkeep and get more line of sight to your general, which is, kind of actually pretty good. If you put points into ardor, you can get your movement and charge bonus for your army. Over here, you can get movement and charge to your bodyguards. Charge gives you breakthrough charges. Unit is not affected by charge defense and charge reflect, and its charge bonus duration is doubled. You can give charge bonus +8 to your army, speed bonus to your army during battle. Does this allow your bodyguard to 1v9? No. At most, I've seen bodyguards get good enough to maybe beat 2-3 units tops. Nothing beyond that. Realistically, your bodyguard, for the majority of the game, can beat 1.5 to 2 units at a time. This is no legendary lord. If you're losing the middle of a battle and your middle, of your army is being pushed in, you can't just send your legendary lord, summon down a fireball, kill them all, and clear that up. You're going to have to commit real resources in the middle of the battle. You're going to have to reposition units and reinforce your middle, or the enemy will break through and start sprinting all their melee into your range. Additionally, I'm just going to say this. Archers are probably overpowered right now. I don't think they're intended to be this powerful. Volley fire in the base game was very weak. If you just volleyed archers into enemy units, it barely did any damage and practically did the same damage back to your own units. It got buffed during the Dynasties update. I don't think it's supposed to be that strong. Give it a day or two, or even maybe a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks, a month tops. It's probably going to be nerfed back. The battles are very melee focused. They're very much focused on flanking enemies and slowly, emphasis on slowly, crushing them between your army and winning that way. It is not meant to be a fast-paced game. Okay, now where am I going? What are the last things to talk about here? What makes this dynasty, what makes the campaign good? Well, let's just emphasize, not being able to stat buff your units is very good. Unit veterancy mattering way more is very good. I think unit veterancy mattering helps the game a lot more. Low tier or even these elite units that I vet up, these guys are going to be monsters. These vet up units are absolute monsters. They will hold off 2-3 units, well, probably 2 units of low tier units. It's very hard for units to fight multiple low tier units. It's kind of like real life. If an enemy flanks behind you and starts hitting you, even if it's a crappy, club, if an enemy starts beating you on the head with a club from behind, there's only so much you can do before you're not going to be able to fight, right? So even though I have the champions of Troy, they will hold the line. They will hold the line, and I had these guys hold the line against the enemy's super bodyguard unit for the entire battle. They held it. They did damage. They didn't break. They did a great job. But unfortunately, they're only men. They're only mortals. And they did not win the battle. They just held the middle of the battle for long enough against the enemy's 2 elite bodyguard units with supporting units. They held it for a while, but they did eventually cave in and rout. This is different from Total War, where a tier 5 or 6 Giga Infantry might be able to take on 5 enemy units at a time, win the battle practically on its own. So that's just one thing to think about. So why is this game doing better? What is it doing better than it has before? One, it's a turn-based game. A turn-based game needs to make each turn interesting. These turns are interesting. Having a court action you can do every turn is fun. Some courts, as you saw with Babylon, the Babylon court is more interesting than the Aegean court. The Aegean court is fine. The Egyptian court is probably the more interesting one. The Hatti court is also decent, I guess. But, there's 4 different courts, 4 different things you can do in there. You do have deities. You can choose different deities to worship. You start with 1. You can get a second later on. What do deities do? Now, this is kind of where you can try to make a strong army. So, for example, Aphrodite. You can devote 1 general to each deity that you worship. So, I worship 2 right now. If you get to 300 worship power juice, you can devote a general. So if I devote to Aphrodite and her big buffs, we can see here that the devoted unit gets 18% morale to the army and 18% replenishment to the army. Very powerful. The shrines in my region themselves gives us 10 workforce growth, which is huge. Food recruitment cost reduction, which could be effective early game. Then if you pray at her shrines, you get captives taken and happiness to the province. Other gods are probably a bit more powerful for actually buffing units themselves. So I look and find Toth here. If you devote to Toth and you have everything up, your lethality, that's your chance to one-shot, goes up by 4%. You get 12 armor for the devoted general. So you can get one very strong devoted general. He gives you happiness and construction cost reduction. When you pray to him, you get basically nothing because this doesn't really do anything. But you can see Toth can give you a bit better of an army. Aphrodite can just allow you to replenish your army. Moloch is very powerful here, giving you melee attack and damage. Melee attack and damage 12%, which is huge. The prayer gives you damage resistance versus missiles and morale. And it gets even better because his shrine gives you a flat +2 melee defense on recruitment, which stacks. So a province that has 4 settlements could get +8 melee defense and recruitment. Moloch is kind of nutty, I'll be honest. Moloch is a bit of a silly Billy. Kind of the biggest stat buffing god. You can get some pretty good units with him, but you have to go find him. He's over here. Good luck getting there from here. It's not the sort of thing you can do very easily. Now, the last thing I want to go over, is this the last thing I want to go over? Probably. Let's talk about it for a second here. How do you defend your territory? If enemies are running around, you probably said to yourself, enemies running around being annoying. No! So every time you go pray at an outpost, here's an outpost. I can get 4 turns of -15% upkeep. And you notice here, you get half your movement back that it took you to get to that outpost. So then I can go to this outpost, and from here to here only took me this much movement speed, allowing me to easily ram into this dude, kill him, and then I can get back out despite the fact that he was in my land raiding my stuff. If I set up my outpost properly, if I kept them alive, I can easily do this. So now you can see right here, I can go back over to here, over to my outpost, reset my movement, and now I can get back up here. So I can get in and out of my land very much easier. This is also very effective. You can watch here. If I need to traverse through my land, if I need to move through my land to get to the other side to reposition, if I have proper outposts set up, then it becomes a lot easier for me to do. So I went up, 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 a lot of movement right there. Very effective, makes having an actual built-up empire very effective. It also means the enemy blowing up your outposts can really hamper your movement, and it means blowing up your opponent's outposts. I actually don't know if the AI uses the outpost system, but overall, then how am I going to rate all this? How is this different from the base game? It differs from the base game by having significantly more diversity. You might imagine going from 8 choices for character starts to like 40-ish is kind of a big difference. Going from 8 to 40 is a big difference. You no longer need to find one faction that you like, and then you can play that one faction like twice before you get bored of the game. You can find a lot of different factions. You can find different Aegean factions. You can find different factions over here. You can find 2 different Cimmerians you might like if you like different starting positions. You can play Lycia. You can play the Troy faction. You can play Agamemnon. Very big stuff. On the campaign map itself, instead of effectively just having Nubians, Egyptians, Canaanites, and Hittites, you now have, just going from left to right, from what I remember, you have the Aegeans, you have the Greeks, the Thracians. Thrace only has one dude. They were not a very major person this time. The Trojans, the Lycians, you've got the Hittite, that's more infantry here, the Hittite that's boring over here. You've got these Cimmerians, I think, up here. You've got the Cimmerians over here, lots of different Hittites over here, Canaanites over here, lots of different choices, lots of different areas. Some of these minor factions are swapping between Hittites and Canaanites. They kind of have different units in their faction roster. You've got the Assyrians over here, the Babylonians over here, the Elamites down here. Over here, we've got the Egyptians. You've got Libyan tribes here and here. You've got the Nubians. You've got different types of Nubians over here, but they're still just going to use the Nubian archers because they're just really, 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 really good. Overall, oh, you also got the, God, what do they call the Arameans over here, but their roster is really weak. I'll be honest. It's both weak in that there's only like 5 of them, and weak in that it's just kind of very low power. If you want to play them though, I mean, hey man, you got a choice, right? And just all in all, I would say building up your faction, doing the diplomacy, trying to do all this, having the different paths to power you can do, having the different abilities to kind of diversify your playthrough a little bit, have a run go a little bit of a different way each time. It's very fun, and I'm actually going to say it. I think I would actually recommend this game right now. I would actually recommend this game. I think just the campaign map alone is pretty good. I might make another video going into battles, because I think battles are also pretty well done. You might be wondering, how did I continue to play through battles? If I'm only using a couple different units, how are the battles interesting? Well, I might go into that later, but I assure you the different battle maps and how they play out and the different terrain modifiers and all that does kind of keep things fresh. And I have done a rematch and used terrain differently and had battles play out very, very, very differently just for using terrain. The AI isn't the best at using the terrain, but you know, that's why you put the AI in hard. Give them a little bit of a buff, and then you can use the terrain against them. Biggest complaint so far is, well, you can see here, the Mycenaean faction has not even completed its starting province. It literally got 1 and then moved away. I don't know why it did that. It did not complete anything. It looks like it ran down here, took Sparta, and that is all it has done, which is very confusing to me, to say the least. I'm not sure why it did that. Some factions can get pretty strong, but overall, just the AI's tendency to sack and raise instead of just conquering tends to mean that it does not get as strong as you'd hope. As for the player, you might not realize it, but this administration tier scaling and how this works very much does keep the player under control. Let's put it that way. Every time you move up a tier, you get hit with higher upkeep. It's kind of like supply lines in Total Warhammer, but also it is affected by the quality of units you're using. So you can't avoid the supply line effect in this game by just only using high tier units. This does kind of keep the game from snowballing out of control. Instead of having 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 armies all in a row by like turn 30, potentially, you're going to kind of be at 3 to 4 for the majority of the game. Now, I do want to talk about one more thing here, actually. I know I said one more thing, but now let's talk about one last more thing, the campaign customization. Now, some of you guys have probably heard me saying a bunch of different things, and you might have gotten annoyed at one of the different things. The campaign customization in this game is quite good. So you probably heard about the lethality change, and you're thinking to yourself, oh, I don't like the idea of a unit getting one shot. I don't like the battles being faster. I wanted a very slow-paced game. You can disable lethality. It will kind of imbalance the game. Some weapons are balanced on high lethality, some are balanced on low lethality, but if you just don't want it, you can do with that. For dynamic weather severity, you can change that. Battle terrain severity. Oh, that's interesting. You can turn off the sea people. You can turn off earthquakes, floods, plagues, droughts. You can make your faction leaders immortal again if you don't like them dying in battle or dying of old age. You can adjust how many turns per year. By default, every 3 years progresses a turn. So most faction leaders are going to start dropping off by about turn 100. Maybe it'll take a bit longer, but maybe like by turn 150-ish, I would say a lot of faction leaders are pretty much gone. Depends. You can change your starting budget. You can change your resource deposit value. Lots of stuff here. So that's just one thing I wanted to say right at the end. If anything I said about the game kind of annoys you, you can change the AI so they don't do diplomacy. The AI factions will be much more aggressive towards you. That one, does this affect them against other AI? No, this is only towards you. Can you make the AI not raise and sack? Because holy crap, that would make them much more capable of actually playing the game, wouldn't they? Huh. Well, okay, there you go. So anyway, Total War Troy, is it better? Yes. This is not Troy. Pharaoh, I mean, it includes Total War Troy now. Not all of it, but some of it. Much better. Way more playable stuff around the world. Way more stuff to do. And also, I just want to go through this real quick. You could tell that Babylon was meant to be a DLC faction. You could tell that they were ramping up Babylon. This missing texture thing should hopefully be fixed soon. You could very much tell that Babylon was very much meant to be a DLC faction. They kind of gave them the DLC faction works. That's all I can really say. Here, let me, actually, I think I have a Babylon save I could load up real quick here. But Babylon is interesting. Their units are a little bit different from everyone else's units. They very much are the spam faction. Instead of having like one army of decent quality units or even 2 armies of decent quality units, they want like 6 armies of absolute crap stack pieces of shit. I don't know a better way to put it. Babylon seems to focus very heavily on just having very, very, very low cost units. You can see here these Saluhu. These Saluhu spears, for example. What are they? They are Saluhu. This unit is weak on its own, but being near a taskmaster makes it more powerful. What is a taskmaster? They're these units with the little taskmaster thing here. They give your Saluhu melee attack, melee defense, and morale. Babylon is weird like that. They've got weird taskmaster stuff. They focus on some few elite units and just a spam of low tier units. Babylon is just very, very odd like that. They also have the Akkadians, which can be kind of cool. Oh, they do get the Akkadian horsemen. So I just wanted to say, if you guys want to see like how different factions can be, it can be pretty different. Some factions can be very different. I just wanted to say that one last thing. Okay, so that's Total War Pharaoh. That's how I would kind of go over the whole thing. That's why I've been playing it a lot. That's why I've been enjoying it a lot. It's got a very interesting campaign map. I like setting up my civilization. And you can see here, the map is, well, I mean, as you can see, where am I? Who am I? Wait. Oh, I know what I'm doing. It's because they changed the camera a little bit. As you can see here, yeah, it's a big map now. So you don't have to fight against the Greeks. You don't have to fight against the Trojans. You could be fighting against the Assyrians for control over Mesopotamia. Presuming the AI bothers to expand, but they will ally, they will attack you. That's it. That's all I have to say about all this. This video is probably a bit too long, but you know, if you guys enjoyed listening to it, that's great. If you didn't enjoy listening to it, that's fine too. But thank you all for being here. Thank you all for watching. That's my very weird review of Total War Pharaoh Dynasties. Thank you all. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.